Welcome to Transforming Work with Sophie Wade, exploring the future of work. Find out what's going on in our multi-generational distributed organizations. With a new tech and talent focus, discover what you need to know to stay upskilled and relevant and ensure your business keeps its competitive edge.
Hi! This episode is about our workplace experiences in spaces that have evolved from managed facilities to environments that reflect corporate culture and values, that foster connection, creativity, and productivity, where there is understanding about people's needs and preferences to support each person and team to do their best work. I'm delighted to be speaking about workplace experiences with Noel McNulty, Director of Global Real Estate and Workplace at Twilio. Noel brings a wealth of understanding to his role, spanning hospitality, facilities management, and workplace experience in multiple industries. Hi, Noel. How are you?
I'm great, Sophie. How are you?
Very well, thank you. You have had a more linear career track than many people that I interview, but I know that what you've been doing and what your job entails has changed so dramatically over the years. So starting out, it's to do with legal. Why did you choose that for studying? And then you went straight into facilities management.
Actually, I'll take a step back from what you've just shared. Ultimately, I moved from Ireland, where I grew up, in 1993. So I've been in the States now over 30 plus years. Actually, when I arrived in the States first, I was working in hospitality. So I spent the first 5 years of my time living in New York and New Jersey, actually moved to upstate New York, and started working in hospitality for the Omni Hotel Company, and spent 5 years literally immersed in all things front of house, back of house, in all things hospitality. And then when I moved out to California in 2000, so January of 2000, I actually was going to go back into the hospitality industry and start working there in operations. And a good friend of mine at the time said, why don't you just go to an agency and find a 9-to-5 job so that you can explore the city, take some time to get used to San Francisco. And so I did. And ironically, my first job that I got through that agency happened to be in facilities management for a tech company. And so fast forward, during that time, I ended up spending 16 of those years to where I am today, working actually inside of law firms, and so managing facilities and operations inside there.
Oh, got it. You obviously happened into facilities management, but then you clearly loved it. What was it that I guess caught your fancy? There's a lot of logistics, spatial organization, but there are a lot more elements to it that I'd love you to explain, because how that evolves over time is really important.
The first role was was all the things that were office operations at the time. And so what was fun about that role was that ultimately I got to apply a lot of what I would have learned in hospitality, because I'd worked front of house and back of house when I was working for Omni. So, did front desk and moved out of there and did sort of some night audit work, and then moved into the back end of accounting. So all things accounts receivable, accounts payable, credit and collection. So I learned a lot about the inner workings
of
all
business,
those particular operations. I got to understand the business better. I also got to understand a lot of the various departments within this tech company that I was working at the time. So I was, building relationships, understanding what their needs were as customers, because they were all very different, and how sort of, again, hospitality applied to, the customer service aspect of what my role and my job was at the time. And so over time, that sort of evolved. Now, about a year and a half into that, unfortunately, there was a downturn in the economy of the United States. And so things did change, and the company I was working at decided that they wanted to relocate to Marietta, Georgia. And I was just after arriving here, met my now husband, and so there was no plans for me to move to Atlanta. So I pivoted a little bit, and then fast forward beyond that, I got my first legal job, and it was at a time where the law firm that I was working with had just renegotiated their lease where they were currently at, and it was a 2.5 year basically restack of 12 floors in a really beautiful historic building in San Francisco. So that is where I really became super immersed on all things operations, moves, ads, changes, design, construction. So a lot of exposure to designers, architects, project managers, and just I would say sort of all things operations or facility management. And so by virtue of that, what I would say is the accidental FM, we like to call them, but you just sort of moved in because you were doing one thing and it aligned and you took it from there.
You've had these different experiences at different types of companies because they operate in different ways. Obviously now we're distributed, hybrid, but as people were moving around the office, different companies, different businesses, people work in teams in different ways, and that affects how the facilities, how the offices need to be set up to be functioning as best possible, to be supportive of the work that is being done. How did that play into these different experiences to offer up new suggestions, to be providing solutions? Obviously, we all responded to open plan offices and those type of things. But you were already bringing in a variety of experiences of different types of setup and different types of workflow that then would inform this new job that you had.
At the core of all of it, I think it's like knowing your customer. And so ultimately, I'll just take one example, doing a complete restack of the one law firm that I mentioned, which took over 2 years and moving people off onto a swing space floor. You'd have 48 hours over the weekend to move them out, set them up, their monitors, all of their things. And so I approach that with a very sort of like, everybody's different. So bringing people along on the journey about working with moving companies and project managers and IT teams about, let's give them their setup. I'm moving them out. I'm displacing them from an office they've sat in for X amount of time. I'm putting them up over here. So what's the 5 important things I would always say to them that you really need to have on Monday morning when you walk in the door? And so, and then I would apply that individually to each person, including the secretaries and administrative staff. So it wasn't that just because they were a lawyer, they were getting that special attention. Everybody was getting the special attention. But I think what I'm sort of trying to say is I learned in that you have to listen to your customers. And even where we are today, I think a lot of it, even as we've moved into this remote first world, it is really about how do you curate and give that experience and allow people, one, to be seen and heard, and that you're thinking about their overall experience. In many cases, sure, you're able to curate that in ways that can be sort of, I guess, more unified, but still there's personalization involved in it. So it goes back to like, know your customer. And I mean know your customer. That means like actually getting to know them as a person, not just about the work they do, not just about sort of like how they work, but like, who are you? What's important for you?
What was it about knowing each person at that stage that helped you understand what it was that their needs were? And were the things that you were surprised about even then? What was the personalization aspect of it that you were already becoming aware of at that time?
I had gotten this lovely card when I moved into working in law firms from a vendor that I'd worked with. And it was this little kid skipping along the stand with a stick. And it was a quote from Maya Angelou that said, people will forget what you said, forget what you did, and they'll never forget how you made them feel. And that quote somehow stuck in my brain and became the catalyst for thinking about how we make people feel. And so from that point forward, every interaction I had changed, like personally, professionally. We'll forget half the things we said today here, because we don't store it. But the feeling that you get and that you are able to have that, time and space to be able to create with somebody is probably the most important few moments, hours, seconds, whatever way you want to, catalog it as being the most important. So that to me was that moment where, for me again, it just became a catalyst of like everything I thought about and everything I did, every interaction. That was my light bulb moment, my aha moment, if you will.
Was that part of what stimulated you to go and work at Zendesk? Was that when you said like, okay, I want to evolve this in a direction that really brings what has now become workplace experience, which wasn't a thing at that time?
I would say the difference there is that tech companies leaned heavily into calling it workplace experience or workplace in general. Like in many traditional settings, like professional settings, professional services, I should say, like, accounting, legal, whatever the case may be, even advertising, they called it facilities. They're actually one of the same in many cases. I think it just depends. Now, you take the workplace aspect and there is a more focus on the word experience. So then, for Zendesk as an example, it was workplace experience. Some people just call it workplace services or workplace operations. So it just depends. It is all one and of the same. I think the philosophy and the approach, however, based on the type of company and values and what they want in terms of what they're offering as a brand, but also what they believe in terms of how they treat their own customers and then how everybody becomes the ultimate customer, I think is part of how this came to life. And so, interestingly enough, I had been working at law firms for over 16 years. And a good friend of mine who I'd been on a board with had asked me a couple of times to, have this role, think about maybe wanting to come here. So that's, after 16 years, I felt like I'd peaked and there wasn't any other place for me to go at that moment in time. And even though I loved everybody I was working with, I decided to make that change. And it was actually a big change, I will say, after 16 years of having everything being kind of very familiar and kind of safe, if you will. The biggest thing I noted about tech was that tech was very front and center. So it's a lot of show and tell, lots of communications, lots of like bringing people together, lots of, high-end sort of like production scenarios of, their CEO or various other heads of departments that would come and speak regularly and kind of in an all-hands setting, make sure there was food and activities. So that was different in terms of how we would do it. Let's say at a law firm, we still had our meetings and various, scenarios that would have been similar, but not, I would say, in such a high-touch way. So a little bit more subtle and more conservative and even probably just nicely done. Not to say it wouldn't have been nicely done, but that was the biggest thing. So you would have these spaces that would have like stages and big screens and all of this technology was dialed in. So that was the big kind of moment
Which
of
was a
change
very
of it.
different type of environment.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so that kind of leads into the experience, Sophie, I would say, is that's where I realized, okay, this experience is different because this is how they approach it.
Then the pandemic happens and you have already started working at Twilio.
Correct.
In workplace ops. What was in that new role that you had at a relative new company when the pandemic happened? When you're thinking about the office, it's a whole different type of experience. The fear that people are going to have, the challenges that you had were completely different in trying to think about what that experience might be like for people who you're hoping can come back into the office again.
I think that was like the biggest fundamental shift for everything that we're dealing with today. That was the moment, right? Because we had just opened up new floors at our headquarters in San Francisco. I just joined Twilio the summer prior and we had done all of this work. We were growing like crazy. And all of a sudden we were sent home thinking it would be a couple of weeks. All of a sudden it sort of was more than a couple of weeks. And so what we did at that moment in time was, well, I think you're right. There was a lot of probably like folks thinking about like, now what? Because we are attached to physical buildings, keeping the lights on, which we still had to do, mind you, in a very sort of like distant way, but we still had to like check in with landlords and our vendors and make sure, even though things were powered down and dialed off to a certain extent, that they were still running. So, our leadership decided, we were going to focus on what we would have called project debt, meaning like we didn't have playbooks or manuals or lots of things because we were so busy growing so quickly. It was like, the dirty dancing thing. Like you'll learn that later. You just need to know the fundamentals now. You're still in that startup mode where like you get the stuff done that you need to get done, but you may not have a paper trail. And we realized that as the company was growing and as we were growing, we needed to have that structure. It was important to leave the legacy of like, here's how it all started. So people could see the chapters prior and sort of, even though the chapters for the future have yet to be written here. So we spent a lot of time doing that. And of course, as the pandemic continued to do its thing, and finally we were starting to see things like vaccines come on, there was meetings, I would say, the lion's share of a lot of our meetings every week were figuring out how are we going to do this. So a ton of cross-collaboration with the health and safety folks, corporate security, legal. There was like everybody in the room, IT, AV. And in those conversations, it was all about, things for us on the operations side about social distancing, making desks unavailable, making sure people aren't sitting close by.
Sure.
So a lot of thing with signage, obviously, installing hand sanitization,
Oh my goodness, I remember.
systems
Yes,
all
everywhere.
across this globe, everywhere, literally, right? So it became this whole rigid and necessary kind of way of how you would come back into the office. And then communications, of course, around how all that was going to be. And then, bringing that in such a way that we're only bringing it back at 25%. And then we would move to 50 once we knew we were safe enough to do that, and 50 to 75, and then turn the tap back on full. And so that was sort of the approach that literally, I would say, took an entire year of a constant bevy of people just meeting continuously, refining it, and then trying to operationalize it. So then we did open up our offices and we brought people back in slowly.
Did it get up to 50 or 75%? No. As leaders and the CEO of the company is seeing what is happening and that people are not coming back in the office. And of course, your company's business is about communications. And distributed communications. So it sort of behooves you to be learning this new way of operating, which is everywhere, and helping your clients be doing that. So if we lean into this, then we can learn how they're working, how they're using communications. How did that real-time learning in the flow of work, updating how we're working, what we're going to be doing, what makes sense, and what are people wanting, what they need, and what are their experiences? How did that go?
It was progress over perfection, if you will. I think in many cases we were trying to make it perfect, knowing what the challenges were and not knowing, I would say that moment in time, that the bigger change to come was that people were comfortable being able to work. They got their work done. Most people were able to get their work done. So that kind of was the big pivot, if you will, was to say that, oh, hold on a second here. People can actually get work done at home. They're all distributed across the globe. We're figuring out our lives when it comes to time zone and sort of how to work async and meeting agreements and team agreements. I think there was a lot of that happening. So, and then I would say, outside of that, I think if I recall correctly, there was one trip I believe our CEO at the time made, and I think he got to witness firsthand the process we had in place for coming into an office in the midst of all of this. And I think that's when we got feedback to say, this is too rigid, we have to change it. So ultimately, that became a moment as well where we took that, because we are builders at Twilio, and we said, okay, what's not working about it? How do we iterate it? How do we change it? And so, that became a moment of, having to be less rigid about the approaches we might have had. Now, again, the swings of the pandemic were happening. So people were getting, herd immunity was starting to come in. We had the vaccines.
So overall flexibility is...
Exactly. What's happening here?
There's more possibility to be less rigid, and realizing that work needed to be less rigid. Interesting.
Exactly. And I think the other thing to highlight here, Sophie, as well, is specifically for Twilio, is that even prior to the pandemic, it had already started to consider, obviously, having remote employees. So while not all of the employees were, there was some that could have been remote employees by virtue of what they were doing. So I think that's when that lens started to get wider and have more focus from leadership about there's an opportunity here, obviously, right? And, then coming out of that and expecting people to come back in, then we started to focus on things like utilization and how much space is. We had a lot of space all across the world, and people weren't coming back, and now we have these spaces. And so you're trying to balance the fact that you have spaces that are somewhat empty. Sure, you're in this mix of people distancing themselves or needing to keep them distance for, health and safety reasons. And at the same time, that was where all of the opportunity of what was about to unfold for us for the next several years forward started to kind of really open up, in that we realized there is a moment here to sort of seize and figure out kind of how we're doing here. And so then I would say that brought us to 2022, in which, leadership really doubled down on the fact that we are going to get clear on us being a remote first company, and what does that actually mean? And all the way around, what does it mean for our customers and being able to hire people and drive impact and kind of still have connection and sort of, just really lean into what that meant for an overall change for the organization.
Obviously, that remote first decision was huge. Because one of the things that struck me when I heard you speak at Running Remote is that there was so much of a cultural inclusion about talking to employees and asking what they thought. Was that part of the decision making to go remote first? And then after that, in terms of how that changed everything about the setup, the experiences, and how you got to where you are now as a company and the role that you have?
Ultimately, that's the thing, when we realized there was an opportunity to be able to change and to be able to think more broadly about how it is. We're a global company. We were close to, I believe, 10,000 people in the midst of the pandemic. We rocket shipped 3 when I started. So there was so much growth, so much change. And then at the same time, we're over here trying to, boil the ocean to solve problems for obviously bringing people back into the office. And many companies, not just us, we're struggling with the challenge, I should say, with the whole return to office mandates and sort of process. But I think that's where, like I said, that lens got to open up. There was more dialogue with the leadership team about what we should be doing. Now, and we also had a change of leadership in terms of our operating group also. What it led to, as I said, was that we realized, I would say in that moment, that that was very beneficial for us, and we were going to make those investments. We are a culture at Twilio, we always listen to our employees. So there's, several times a year where we pulse check by, surveys with our teams. One, just to understand how they're feeling, making sure we're understanding where they're at. And then out of that process, looking at that data and examining it for what actions or opportunities are there to exploit here to make these, make our teams better for a variety of reasons, to make them sure that they are able to have high impact in what it is they're doing for their customers or indeed for their teams. And then just in also being able to understand how they're operating, because every team is different. They are by virtue of what they do.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the process of, and that rigor of doing these surveys also gives us an opportunity to understand, are we focusing on the right things? So I think that's another big piece of what we continue to do even today in terms of making sure that we can create high impact for our customers and ourselves and our teams, and then also keeping connected and building trust and, things that are really important to have people be able to do their best work and wherever they want to do it from, for the most part.
So, Noel, so much of what you're saying seems very obvious, but I do know that there are lots of companies that are not doing that, or lots of teams that are not doing that, and lots of managers that are not, I think, recognizing the extent to which there needs to be a lot of iteration, exploration, and conversation about how we can and need to be working, because so much has changed in terms of our tools and our locations and the type of work and how we're coming together on more project work. There are lots of different elements that have nothing and many things to do with location, because it could be down the corridor in an office, how we're connecting, how we have one other person or many other people from our other different offices, or whatever location they may be working from. And all of those things need to be supported, and we need to be learning, as you said, having those team agreements, learning synchronous and asynchronous and what those differences are and the tools that go with them, recognizing that there is so much to it that we need to be proactive and intentional about understanding. If there are any things that you can point to that really may have been drivers that you recognized why that was so important. I'm trying to find the sort of push points as to what will help other leaders and managers recognize the work that needs to be done. There are so many things that are hard right now that I just want to make some things easier.
Sure. Yeah. Look, I think as you're talking, I think the thing that's coming up for me the most, one of the reasons I love working for this company and have enjoyed working for over 6 years now, or almost 6 years, I should say, is that we're a super values-based company. We've always been grounded in our values. And I think our values drive us into the right directions, if you will, of how we evolved to where we are today. And I say that because, we have a whole slew of values that we call it the Twilio magic. And so that is where we ground a lot of our, our process, how we communicate with our teams and our people and our customers, more importantly. Like one of our values is like we're the customer shoes. Like we had 12, we've kind of synthesized those down into 4 core principles, which are we are builders, we are positrons, we're open and curious. Those values, I think, have really allowed and helped us to sort of, be more open to sort of like adapting change and understanding, like I said, what's next for us, even when it comes to just our overall company strategy. But being grounded in those values it's the foundation for all of the things that we do. Now, I think that became also very key to what we now call open work, which basically is sort of our philosophy for how we allow our employees to thrive in a remote first environment. So it's, a lot of that is to do with making sure there's time for connection. Even though we're distributed, we throw budget at folks to be able to bring their teams together at least once a year. We do a lot of work on, again, team norms and asynchronous work. We highlight and showcase folks internally through Slack, through Switchboard Stories, which is our intranet page, on sort of, the values of the things that they're doing, the impact they're making with their customers. And just, doing a lot of sort of that where we showcase what it means to be a Twilio. And it is, like, I believe we have a really great reputation on the streets for this and being a really great company to work for, because we've been always grounded in those values. And even though they've evolved into being sort of more four core principles that I was sharing earlier on, but we are a company of builders, and we like to build great things. And even sometimes in building, and I've had this experience myself, if it doesn't always work, there's still learning inside of that you come away with that helps you to shift more. So I think it's all about being open, curious, and and again, I use the word flexible because I think you have to be flexible, you have to be agile, especially knowing we've gone through a pandemic. There's probably other things on the horizon we're not even aware about that we're still having to navigate through. So I think it's just like being open to that, being okay with it. I think another phrase I've heard thrown around quite a bit is getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, and which is such a true thing, because there's so much of things in life these days that are uncomfortable, and getting comfortable with them actually allows you the agency and the freedom to be able to explore the possibilities and understand what's coming out of that and what you can bring forth from it.
Going all the way back to the beginning of the conversation, and facilities management, it has a slightly different title, but it is a different kind of job because we're thinking really about the space and about the experience in a different way. What would be the top 3 things that you would say in terms of comparing and contrasting what that job was before and where it is now, and how people must be thinking about the experience of each employee who may be sometimes working from home, sometimes on the road, sometimes in the office, sometimes working as a team, many times working as a team, not necessarily in the office, but elsewhere. What does that mean for your job?
I mean, look, I think one that just rings through from the very beginning to what we were talking about in my early days to now is like, know your customer. You have to know your customer. I think the second thing, it's like we live in a sort of data-rich, world, meaning that data is power. It gives us information to be able to understand, are we focused on the right priorities? Are the things that we're building and working on actually doing good? Are they creating impact? Have they improved, the lives of our customers and or our teammates? Are they indeed firing on all cylinders of the things we believed that they were before we kind of started into them? So I think those are kind of 2 key things. And then look, the last one I would just say is like, now is the time to be more open and curious than ever. Like there's so much going on in our world, so much that's out of our control and so much that maybe is in our control. But I think it's really about how we respond to making sure that we take care of one another. Like, the basic human need to just be able to be heard, listened to, seen, felt, to go back to it. Like that has never been more important than it is in this moment in time. And I feel like, again, very lucky to work for a company whose super leaned into sort of being, I would say, progressive in this respect, which is amazing because they've said, we believe in this and here's why.
Yeah.
And we know it works and we're continuing to make it even greater than what it is. And that goes, again, all the way to our customers, like right all the way to like just knowing our customers, making sure everything has a customer service aspect attached to it and about creating just really positive experiences where people feel really good. And so when they think Twilio, they were like, I love Twilio and here's 10 reasons why. And similarly, we do the same thing with our internal customers. It's like, because, people want something positive and they want to feel the impact of that good. And that's why I think people really strive to work hard and just do the best that they can.
So many of the things and the principles that you have, the values of your organization are related to empathy, putting yourself in other people's shoes. So you and I are on the same page about empathy because that's my thing. Part of the very interesting thing about empathy, I find, is also about you have to know yourself first. I can't tap into you and your experience if I don't know enough about myself. You don't have to know everything, but it is. So it's that self-awareness, which is important for not necessarily so much about putting yourself in the shoes of customers, but for you in your work to help your employees thrive wherever they're working. It really is a question of helping them also understand their preferences. Some people really know. They're kind of like, well, I need this and I need focus and I'm, maybe I'm super introverted and so that's why I need to work from home. But some people really, the pandemic helped them understand a bit more about some of the things that they really needed or were really not good for them. But this is something in your position to really be cultivating good workplace experiences for every single person, and every single person is so different. You can put yourself in their shoes, but they also need to put themselves in their own shoes first to some degree. How do you try and sort of cultivate that?
Such an interesting question. I love that you asked it. I think it goes back to being, open and curious and about asking the right questions. And by that I mean that, so separate and sidebar here just for a sec. In the middle of sort of coming out of the pandemic, my company was really amazing and they gave coaching to managers who had large teams. So I was super lucky for the first time in my entire career to get coaching.
Nice.
It was an amazing
so
gift. What it taught me in the midst of that though was again, having mentors and people to look up to was that I did get to connect with some really great people who actually, to your point, taught me to look at things about myself that I also needed to. Because in the midst of all that, challenge and change, I'm like, am I being a good enough manager to my team? Like in the midst of the pandemic, just checking in, like everybody's mental wellness was very much, front and center, including my own. And so, I think having that opportunity to be able to sort of take a step back, go into a conversation and have somebody just ask you like questions that open your mind up where you have your own aha moment. It mightn't have been in the session, it might have been afterwards. So that inspired me in the midst of all that to actually go and study and get a life coaching credential, which I'm still in the midst of getting my ACC, but I did the course and finished, which was the main piece of what I wanted to get to. And where I'm going here is that profession in and of itself is growing in leaps and bounds at a time in our lives where now you have AI entering into the conversation. So you've got this, large language model that's over here telling us all this stuff. And at the same time, humans are still having a hard time to understand who they are themselves. And so I say all that to say that, look, I feel like it's this moment in time where, and now I believe you can even have an AI coach, which in some cases probably are really good because they might, again, ask you the right question that unlocks you into possibilities. But look, for me, it's just about what I learned in that process is if I'm thinking about a question over here in one particular way, what I now do is I flip it on its head and I go to the other side. Because generally what I found is on that other side is where everything I need to know or everything I need to be open to is showing up. Because I have a bit of a fixed mindset if I just think about it this way. So it's just, again, saying, just be open. Be open, be curious and see what happens.
that's on the existential side, and getting slightly bit more granular to wrap up. For someone who is at a company that, and maybe tasked with real estate, workplace strategy, workplace experience, and or be involved to, connected with HR and or IT in terms of thinking about how people are working and helping employees do their best work, as the way you put it, which is the way I put it. Thinking from a workplace strategy point of view, what would be 2 or 3 things that you advise that they, in terms of advancing in the right direction, if they can see that employees are not set up for success?
Another great question, Sophie. Look, I would say come together or talk to one another. I think I said this even when I was chatting at Running Remote about just what's changing in the world of real estate. But even if you don't think somebody should be at the table, have them at the table. Everybody has a voice. So when you're thinking about the workplace, the actual experience, another one of the things I love about Twitter is because of our open work, initiative, we do have all those people at the table. So they all are hearing in real time. They all get to contribute. Now, I'm not saying that it's necessarily always perfect, but what I am saying is that they have a place, they have a voice, and they're considered in terms of how that affects them and their teams if they're asked to work on something and collaborate. I think the other thing I've learned as well definitely in the last year, or maybe 2 years, I would say at this point, there are so many people. Talk to your friends outside. There's such an incredible community. The Running Remote community was new to me this year. Going into it, these were all new people. An amazing community of super smart people, just brilliant, kind, wonderful. Just have so much in there to explore and to learn from. And this is our moment. And so I think just look around you. You're not doing this by yourself. There's many days I thought oh my God, this is crazy. I had my own imposter syndrome, and I still from time to time get that. But at the end of the day, it's I pick up a phone, I send an email saying, look, hey, what are you doing? Because I have this challenge. And last week I was at an event as well with one of our partners and sat in the room with probably 75, workplace leaders. And the same thing, everybody, a problem shared is a problem halved, basically. And out of that, you can create so much more. And I think the other thing in closing is just to say, have fun with it. Just have fun with it. I think so much of our things we have to deal with and so much of our lives are so serious and can be very jarring, and these days can be very mentally draining, and look, we're just out of the pandemic. I think we're only now scratching the surface of what the pandemic did to us as human beings also, which I think is a very important moment of realization to say, now more than ever, we got to be good to one another and keep an eye out for one another and be there for each other.
What a beautiful note to end on. That sums it up. So thank you so much, Noel. I've talked to so many people who want to change the work experience for the better in different places and are not sure, what's at the core, those values that are a core and that radiate out from there in terms of how the experience can change. So thank you very, very much for your time and sharing what you've learned over time and the journey that you're on.
My pleasure, Sophie. Really loved it. Thanks so much. Appreciate you.
Thanks again so much to Noel McNulty, Director, Global Real Estate and Workplace at Twilio. You can find out more about Noel on LinkedIn, as well as go to their website, twilio.com, twilio.com. Immediate action tip: to improve workplace experiences. First, let everyone contribute, as all their experiences matter. Secondly, gather external input. There's a broad community with people all focused on solving the same issues. Third, have fun with it. Are you concerned your team isn't well prepared for the months ahead? Could results improve if team members collaborated better? My new course, Empowering High-Performing Teams, addresses these issues and many more, helping leaders and teams adapt to modern work to handle the challenges we are all facing in an AI-accelerated world. Check out modernworklife.co to find out more. If you enjoyed this episode, please like it, share it with a friend, and write a quick review wherever you watch or listen. For more curated, useful research, articles, and information, follow me on LinkedIn and sign up for my Work in Progress newsletter, which is available at flexos.work. Thanks for watching. See you next time.